Why are they selling poppies, Mummy? Selling poppies in town today. The poppies child are flowers of love for the men who marched away. Why have they chosen a poppy, Mummy? Why not a beautiful rose? Because my child men fought and died in the fields where poppies grow. But why are the poppies so red, Mummy? Why are the poppies so red? Red is the colour of blood, my child, the blood that our soldiers shed. The heart of the poppy is black, Mummy. Why does it have to be black? Black, my child, is a symbol of grief for the men who never came back. But why, Mummy, are you crying so? Your tears are giving you pain. My tears are my fears for you, my child, for the world is forgetting again.
And welcome to Media Musings, since, we're coming up on what's known as Remembrance Day in the rest of the world.
And it's Remembrance Sunday today. Remembrance Day is the 11th for Wednesday. We'll point out, because it's been commented on in the chat, the muted intro was deliberate.
It was intentional, because it was a moment of silence.
Yeah. Which is unusual for me.
Yeah.
Yes. Damn it, Jen.
And thank you, Never Again.
Hi, Sandy. Hi, Dave.
Yeah.
Thank you, Never Again. Yeah.
Welcome to Media Musings. Currently, we have Gutless Scummer, Critical Cripple, and Never Again in the chat. And of course, hello to anyone who's lurking or maybe watching in the future. Now,
with a time machine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, since we are talking the time machine, I'm going to go back to last week.
Yeah.
And mention something that should have been mentioned while we were discussing War of the Worlds, but it's equally or a little less pertinent for the time machine than it was for War of the Worlds, because it's less used. So while we did say last week that H.G. Wells is progressive for his time, the emphasis is for his time. It's more prolifically used in the War of the Worlds, but he does use the whole scale of civilization idea, which was somewhat rampant in the Victorian era, where quote-unquote savages are held below, seen as lesser than civilized, i.e. European urban people.
Yeah.
And Scummer. Or anyone who's watching in the past. So, and there is some mentions of that. So, he was progressive for his time, but in the eyes of a modern reader, there is still a bit to go, which is why I'm kind of hesitant about doing I know I mentioned doing Dr. Moreau and the Invisible Man a few weeks down the line. I'm kind of hesitant on doing Dr. Moreau. I'll have to reread it.
Yeah.
And I do somewhat have to mention that because while they are not described such, as such in the book, from what I remember and from what I've seen, seen of screenshots and such, the Morlocks in most visual depictions of the time machine are portrayed with dark skin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
but early
makes no
depictions.
fucking sense because they live underground.
Yeah, and also in the time machine, it's very much like they are compared in color to that of a maggot. They are white.
Actually, they are that color in the later last movie that was done.
Oh yeah. But in the later movie, they're also portrayed as hyper intelligent.
Yeah.
But they maintain an adaptability that the
Eloi don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they are in the most recent Time Machine adaptation movie. They are portrayed as enlightened and like the pinnacle of human civilization. Which is
politics.
Yeah.
That's as bad politics as saying that that's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, and while we are going to be discussing eating the rich, I think this is a story, whereas while we were discussing War of the Worlds thematically, I think this is one where we discuss where it's best to go chronologically, because that's how the themes develop in the novel itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of very good tropes and a lot of good literary analysis to be done chronologically as well.
Yeah. And I will say that in a lot of ways, the Time Machine is kind of the opposite of the War of the Worlds. It's
a dystopia, isn't it?
Well, because
it is.
Yeah, in one way, it is a dystopia, but like in the terms of like reception, the War of the Worlds essentially spawned the alien invasion drama.
Yeah.
Arguably, you could say the Time Machine did the same thing to time travel, but it's much more wishy-washy because their time displacement stories have been a thing for hundreds of years before the Time Machine.
It is.
Whilst the Time Machine was a device to drive the story, it wasn't the central theme of the story per se.
And here's the thing with later time travel stories, the time travel is, the notion of cause and effect is the theme of the time travel genre. It is the primary theme.
Yeah. And I think the Time Machine is it's not about cause and effect, because he goes so far into the future that he can see the causes and the effects of them, but they are not entirely central to the plot.
It's more a literary tool so that you can peer into a future.
It's more like speculative fiction than anything else.
The time machine itself and the time travel aspect of the Time Machine, the novel, is literally just a framing device.
Yeah, it's a MacGuffin, more or less.
It is pretty much MacGuffin.
As far as time travel stories go, the time travel isn't that important. It could have been done differently. You could have visited somewhere else that had this kind of civilization.
or especially from the point of view of the Eloi, it's definitely a MacGuffin.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So it's not a necessarily tool to the story. So I wouldn't. I don't think you could claim it spawned time travel type stories.
Yeah. Well, I mean it.
there's definitely sci-fi elements there, and it definitely spawned
Oh yeah, definitely.
a view to looking at the science of time travel.
Yeah.
It did.
And he was one of the first to do that.
Yeah,
Let's not take that away
it
from
was, as far as I'm aware, it was the first time travel story that actually had a time machine.
Is
Yeah.
it? Ooh.
I wouldn't want to bet money on it, but I can see how that would work.
Yeah.
And
And
a mechanically engineered machine, as opposed to it being some form of magic or something like
you
that.
know, going into the fairy realm and time being different there, or and there is actually clues to that being the case in the text itself, because the first like 4 chapters are literally presenting the idea of it is possible to travel in time, other than, you know, the way we do so normally.
Yeah. And the first 4 chapters are interesting because they're full of literary tropes. The idea of a story within a story.
Yeah.
Is
the clock that went backward beats the time machine by 14 years.
Yeah. Definitely is a Victorian thing, isn't it?
It's a Victorian trope.
Yeah. Definitely
so the clock
trope.
is a time machine, and by turning it backwards, you can go backwards in time.
Mm.
So it actually did study the concepts of cause and effect.
Yeah.
Unlike the time machine. So,
but it is. Yeah, it is a story within a story, because, you know, our narrator is not the time traveler, which is kind of a subversion of. Well, I can't really call it a subversion because, you know, the time machine came before all its adaptations. But there's a trope that, you know, that tends to happen in loose adaptations, especially of the time machine, is that the time traveler is H.G. Wells himself.
Yeah. Or the narrator is H.G. Wells himself.
Yeah.
But if you want to see other examples of the protagonist not being the narrator, famously Sherlock Holmes.
I gotta change my earpiece.
Cool. There are several other examples, but Sherlock Holmes is the most famous one.
Frankenstein.
And this idea of Victorians getting together at night and telling each other ghost stories, it appears in Oscar Wilde.
Yeah.
Is it the one with the portrait?
The portrait of or the picture of Dorian Gray. Yeah.
I'm sure it appears in that. Or in another one of Oscar Wilde. I've read so much Oscar Wilde, they all blur together in my brain. Even the idea, it goes all the way back to the Canterbury Tales.
Yeah.
The people telling the stories are not the protagonists of the stories.
Yeah.
It's a very common, particularly English literature trope, I think.
Yeah.
Well, the stories of Merlin and King Arthur and that are not told by the characters in the story.
Yeah, but I think there's a difference between telling it in the third person omniscient and having a narrator,
another character narrator.
You know, it's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, isn't it? If you read that, it's Chief narrating the story.
The story,
but he's not the protagonist. It's that.
Yeah,
it's an awesome story.
Yeah, it's a great trope.
But because
it immediately gives it that suspense of the narrator only knows as much as we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just wanted to fangirl about that trope a little bit.
And It's one of the nice things about me live tweeting the books I read
is you now have a summary of what you were thinking.
Well, yeah. Well, is I now have quotes for it, you know, that I could go. You know, presuming I can.
Sorry.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. There's the thread. Okay. Because you know, it starts in a like it seems like at least the bit of the plot that centers around the quote unquote present day, is centered around like meetings of an educated of a gentleman's club.
It's a salon, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's,
where they kind of hang out together and talk about like what ifs and paradoxes and such.
It is a literal literary version of The Birth of Frankenstein, the story.
Yeah.
Like, they got together and told stories, and that's how Frankenstein, the story, was written.
And
it's that.
And the time travelers, starts with his, talking about how he's been working on fourth dimensional geometry. So if you don't have the constitution for math, this is a trigger warning for you.
I should have had that when I started reading it. My brain hurts. I had to get a pen and paper and start drawing vectors. I haven't drawn vectors since I was 16. There's a reason I stopped.
Yeah. But, brief summary, if you have a dot, it has no length, no breadth, no depth.
Yeah.
If you have a line, it has length, but no breadth or depth. If you add breadth, you have a square.
If you have depth, you add a cube.
But can an instantaneous cube actually exist?
So can you have a cube without first having a dot and a line?
No,
and a square?
the question is, because dots, lines, squares, they're all abstractions.
Yeah.
So, a dot, an object with no length, breadth, width, with no length, width, or breadth cannot exist. An object with just one, with just length cannot exist. An object with just length and breadth cannot exist.
I'm sorry, an object with just length cannot exist. I have rulers that would disagree with you.
No, even a ruler has width and breadth.
Yeah, but okay. So basically, what we're saying is, can this exist before a line, a dot, and
no,
a square exists on paper?
No. The argument is, so the thing is that cube you're holding in your hand. Not only does it have length, width, and breadth, but it also has duration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if
I'm
you
trying
don't,
to visually
if it doesn't
represent
have a
this and it's not
duration,
working.
can it not exist?
Yeah.
It goes with the argument that it is. Is there? Is the universe in each moment we have actually independent?
Yeah.
So is there a moment that is this moment, and then it stops being, and then the next moment is?
Yeah.
Ben, I'm a historian, not a physicist.
It's basically a very rudimentary argument for the concept of space-time.
Yeah. So basically, can it exist if it only exists if it existed in a time so minute that it cannot be measured?
Yeah.
To be fair, H.G. Wells was not prophesizing Einstein in doing this. These concepts already existed in Lorentz translation.
Is this not just Plato's cave all over again? Is this not the shadows on the cave wall all over again?
Can
they exist if we don't,
It's more an argument that there's more than just the three dimensions we physically experience. There is also time as the fourth dimension.
Yeah, time is a construct.
This is the argument that it is not, because if you have an object that has no time, or that is without time, does that object actually exist, or is that object just an abstraction?
Listen, my clock went back a week ago. Time is a construct. Fight me.
Okay, so we're talking small t time and big t time.
Exist, so
yeah, big T time is the dimension. Time duration exists.
Mm.
Yeah.
How we measure it is a
our
construct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell I'm really not a scientist? And the thing is, I had to read these chapters like 3 times to grasp this concept, which is why I'm sort of playing this out as that I don't understand right now, to give people an idea. Because I know there will be people in the chat and watching this who have no fucking clue what you two are talking about.
It's amazing that it goes to show that thing of what we were talking about last week was how well read H.G. Wells was of the scientific literature of his time.
Yeah.
Because he'd obviously read about Lorenz translations, and he knew about he knew the work that was already being done to talk about space time before Einstein had even published anything. I mean, because Einstein built on the works of Lorenz and damn it.
Also, that I'm pretty sure this might have been before Einstein was born.
Was it? No. Because the book wasn't published until 1895.
Let's just say H.G. Wells was a clever dick and leave it at that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Einstein was born in 1879.
Yeah.
And
so
the time machine.
He would have been in high school.
He was a very clever dick.
Yeah. So the time machine as a complete volume was published in 1895.
Yeah.
So yeah. Right. Anyway.
It's kind of above everybody's head, which is kind of why he takes a chapter walking the reader through the concept.
The thing is, as well, though, even if you can understand what he's getting at, there are holes in the theory.
Yeah.
There are. Yeah. I don't know exactly how to explain what the holes are, but I know there are holes in the theory because I couldn't grasp it. And if the theory was explained properly and made sense, I would have grasped it.
And if you really want to go into that rabbit hole, I highly suggest reading Flatland.
Oh, Flatland is brilliant. We could do a whole episode just on Flatland.
Oh yeah.
I'm not here for that.
But anyways, and so after he illustrates this by showing three different pictures, one of a young boy, one of a young man, one of an older man. And it's like
what we were just talking about with how quick H.G. Wells was onto things. Lorenz published his work on the Lorenz transformations, which was starting to talk about time and space being intertwined before Einstein went it further with general relativity in 1887. So only 7 years before he published the book. So Wells was right on top of that, reading about it to be able to use that in his books. He was right on.
I will say as
everything.
Well, the conflation of the physics with literary that is coming confused the hell out of me. That's what confused me, because they were talking about, I understand that in time we are kind of trapped on this timeline where we keep going forward regardless. But then when they start talking about, but if I think about it and get lost in a memory, I've traveled back. What are you smoking? Because I want some.
That's a literary device, that one.
But
mixing
literary devices and physics is hard.
Yeah.
And it is, and he does it really well.
And we have one of the unnamed members of the salon, because there are only actually 3 named characters. None of them actually impact.
And the time,
No.
Hi, GSM, by the way.
No. So there are only 3 characters with actual names. There are quite a few, because we have the narrator, we have the time traveler. They're not named. They, we have the the medical expert, the editor, the journalist,
psychologist,
they all end up with names in the movies.
Yeah, the very young man. The only 3 named characters or Philby, Weena, which is the Eloy that the time
Eloy
traveler befriends. And then one of the narrator's clients is mentioned by name at the end.
It's weird because it's like the setup to those jokes, isn't it? Like, a psychiatrist, a doctor, and a very young man walk into a bar.
Yeah, and hello, Geo Sam. And of course, everyone's arguing with the time travelers, like, yeah, but we can move, freely in 3 dimensions. And the time traveler's like,
no, we can't.
No, you can't really, because gravity holds you down.
Yeah.
And that's basically introduces the reader to the idea of a time machine.
Yeah. I do think talking about gravity holding you down within the dimensions of space is really useful for understanding how his concept of the way we move in time, because we're held down by forces beyond our control and understanding.
Yep.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff.
Oh, yeah.
See, if Jeff disappears right now, did he exist because he didn't have duration?
And does he stop existing when he does disappear?
Yeah.
Ooh.
And so
the only thing you can be sure of that, or semi-sure of that does exist, is your own thoughts.
Yeah.
And now we've fallen into the Matrix.
But anyways, so the time traveler
solipsism is where we're falling into.
Yeah, that is definitely solipsism.
Definitely.
And what?
I was say, Joe, my ex-girlfriend was a solipsist. When she broke up with me, she said, "It's not you, it's me."
But
anyways,
are you afraid?
And of course, during this opening lecture / debate / TED talk that the time travelers, giving, I don't know about you, but he definitely came across to me as like one of those like very enthusiastic, like almost infectiously so characters.
Dude's a nerd.
Yeah.
I'll say I've decided I'm gonna be the provincial mayor of this stream. I'm just gonna say it bluntly. Which is really funny because in the audible version of this book, the provincial mayor is a Yorkshireman.
Yeah. Now I've got
found hilarious.
Dog in Lady in the Tramp, the one that sings the song. He's a tramp, but he loves him, and now all I can think of it. He's a nerd.
But
sorry.
Yeah.
I sidetracked myself.
And so, of course, as he's explaining, the others kind of get on board with this idea, and the very young man, and they start, talking about what they would do with a time machine, which proves that the idea of like what you would do with a time machine is as old as time machine stories almost.
Oh yeah.
Because there was one that was before H.G. Wells's The Time Machine.
Yeah.
Also, do not take a drink every time we say time machine because you will die.
Yeah, there's a reason I'm drinking soft drinks this week.
I only have Foster's because it's about all that's left in the store at the moment.
But that's fucking close to water too.
Yeah.
I think you'll be all right with Foster's.
I might be okay.
Question: as a classicist, how did you feel about their comments on Greek?
Oh, I was concerned. I was irritated. I was just like, that's not how it works.
Yeah, it's like with a time machine, you could learn Greek from the mouth of Homer and Heraclitus, and then one of the other members of the salon is like, yeah, but the Germans have made vast improvements into Greek.
Oh, it's a good job I didn't have a physical copy of the book and was listening, or I'd have thrown it.
Yeah.
I just
And of course,
there was a lot of study on the development of Greek and figuring out how ancient Greek works, and a lot of it came out of Germany. But no, just go.
No.
and the very young man goes, well, if I had a time machine, I could put all of my money in the bank, jump forward into the future, and then collect all the interest.
Doesn't that happen in Futurama with Fry?
Yeah.
He suddenly checks his bank account that had like next to nothing in there, but after like 1,000 years of interest, he was like a billionaire.
Yeah, but yeah. So here's the very young man's comment. Obviously, or possibly paraphrased for length because I'm reading it from my tweet of it. Then there is the future. Just think, one might invest all one's money, leave it to accumulate interest, and hurry on ahead. And then the narrator replies, to discover a society erected on a strictly communistic basis.
Which is just fantastic foreshadowing.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. And I will say this book is a great. I think it's a fantastic foreshadowing of what attempts at communism would look like by the mid 20th century.
Yeah.
An unseen underclass and the haves and have-nots. Like that phrase is in the book, the haves and have-nots. And I should point out that it became very popular about 1950-ish.
Yeah.
For reasons.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, with Wells, Wells was a socialist, although perhaps not necessarily in the same way. What we figure the term today. He had some, as you said earlier in the stream, he was progressive for his time, and that is, and it's very. I'm glad you did emphasize that point, because he was quite involved with the Fabian Society for a while, but he also had some conceptions that differed a lot from the Fabian Society's sort of brands of socialism as well. It's interesting. I think you got to get into the mind of where he's kind of coming from in his works.
And so, he progresses through his TED Talk with a little experiment where he does everything in his, where the time traveler does everything in his power to show that it is not, a sleight of hand trick.
Also, I will point out the logic of it not going into the past because they've not seen it before is incredibly flawed. Also, the logic of it not moving in space, even as it moves in time, is incredibly flawed.
Oh, very.
Yeah.
But he does actually address that.
Yeah.
But it's still
the biggest problem when he says that, it doesn't move in space, but it moves in time. Well, then you're really screwed because the Earth has now moved from where it is, and you're all dead.
Well, I think obviously it wasn't one. Obviously, it's not. This is conjecture on my part because the time machine is a framing device.
Yeah, it is.
Also,
but my idea of how it works is it's basically, it's not that it doesn't move in space. It's that it doesn't move in space under its own power. So it's still,
moves with the Earth, but
it still moves. Yeah.
It's affected by the relativity of the Earth.
Yeah.
But because otherwise it's very interesting. In the description of the time travel itself, he talks about seeing the seasons change.
Yeah.
Now, if he
Yeah.
stayed in exactly the same spot, he could only ever see the same day of the year every year as he traveled through time. So he
Yeah.
would never see the seasons change.
Yeah. So, like, he's
So there's
yeah.
somewhat
So
hinted
he's
at.
still in his he's still in his place relative to the motion of the Earth.
Mm.
Yeah, because basically what he does is he sits on the Earth, but he accelerates time forwards and backwards.
Yeah.
Mm.
But he's immune from it. So
he anchors himself to the planet into a
he
spot.
anchors himself in a spot and accelerates time forwards and backwards.
What's
but-
that phrase from Doctor Who? It's a fixed point in time and space.
Yeah.
A fixed point. It's that
Yeah.
concept, isn't it?
Yeah.
And of course we have a slight a chapter discussing how the time traveler is basically too clever for his own good, because he kind of comes across as a bit of a con artist without meaning to.
Yeah, because he played a trick on them the previous Christmas with a ghost.
Yeah. Well, this is before that was before the demonstration with the model, but it does mention that it's harder to believe it's harder for them to believe what the time traveler says than it would be for any other member of their, if Philby had said the same thing, they probably would have, if Philby had said the same thing in the lecture, they probably would have been less skeptical.
Yeah, I think also it amuses me how skeptical the psychologist is.
Yeah.
Like the one person who should be able to read another human being and read his intentions and motives from a psychological standpoint is the one who's most skeptical.
Or a fitting, the center of the thesis of this, chapter is it is a mistake to do things too easily.
Mm. And then you've got the provincial mayor who's just like, it doesn't make sense, therefore it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
On my understanding, so I don't care. That's flat earther. He's a flat earther. Come on. I don't understand it, so it can't be true.
But so, the narrator and the other members of the salon go through their, week, and come back, and the time traveler, even though it's at his place, is late,
which is just hilarious to me.
And it's given, he gave the medical man instruction to start dinner at a certain hour, and he'll arrive when he can.
I want to point out that the people chosen to witness this, it's very cleverly done. They are a cross-section of society. They are all in their own way educated men, but educated in different ways. Where they would all... It's... Because they would all approach the question in a different way, it's essentially he's created himself a peer review system.
Yeah.
Whereby everyone has to believe in order for it to stand up to scrutiny. And he's not relying on class structures or a particular type of person to catch him out. He wants people who think in all different ways.
Yeah, because we have a few people from the last week, the medical man, I think, and the narrator.
Yeah.
And then we have an editor, a journalist. I think that's about it.
And the silent man.
Oh, yeah, and the silent man. And so they eat their dinner, and suddenly the time traveler rushes up. His clothes are in tatters. He's got old injuries on him. And he comes to the table, and the first thing he says is, "I'm starving for a bit of meat."
I mean, given what his options were, I'm
Yeah.
not surprised he went vegan for a while.
Yeah. And so, after eating dinner, he gets everyone into the smoking lounge and begins his story. And then we get the description of how time travel feels. And
I want to, just because I was talking about the dinner guests.
Yeah.
There is one point I wanted to make on that.
Okay.
Did you notice who wasn't represented in that list of guests?
Who
very specifically? No, from the group. No, there were scientists represented. There were medical people represented. There were laymen represented. What's the one thing that was missing in that group of people?
Oh, there'll be lots of things missing from that group.
No, but I mean, in a broad strokes, what's the one thing that was missing?
There were no women.
No, but
yeah.
No.
Of the time, they were all skeptical people. What's the one thing you can't be and be skeptical?
Religious.
Christian.
Bingo.
Yeah.
There were no religious people at that dinner party.
You
Why?
can be.
Because there were no outright stated religious people at that dinner party, and that was because they wouldn't have been skeptical. He wanted people who were skeptical there.
You can be religious and be skeptical.
Yeah, you can.
You can.
It's
But
hard
what
if
he's
you're
getting at
Christian,
is he wanted people who were men of science, thinkers, not believers. He wanted to be disproved. He wanted to be able to say, look at all these people, none of whom have ever fallen for something like that. All people who are skeptical and they believe. Yeah. That was the target. You can't do that if you... He's kind of having a dig at the religious when he's saying, well, they'll believe anything. He wants people who won't.
And so, he brain. He travels to the year 802,701.
Yeah.
Someone just typed numbers into a calculator, didn't they?
Yeah. Or at least that's how that's how it reckons on the dial of the time machine. So arguably, it could easily be like 1,890 years after that. Assuming the point that the machine was invented, all the dials are set at 0, so he goes 800,000 years into the future. By common era, it would be like 820 something, or 804,000 ish years.
Decent amount of time.
Yeah. And this is where we get to the real meat of the novel, or shall I say, the real bread of the novel.
Can anyone make a Hannibal noise?
Yeah. But
it's absolute coincidence.
Yeah. And of course, make the and of course all the communist noises. Because
survive that long.
Also, this dude's opinion on gender and sexuality is really weird.
Yeah. So because the time machine, like, you know, as we said before, is not a story about time travel. The time travel is a framing device. This is a story about class warfare.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yes.
social mores.
Yes.
It's a social commentary.
And it's also it's also like brilliantly meta in some ways about how it criticizes itself.
We could almost say it works in several different dimensions.
Oh.
Yeah.
You're fired.
But
Yeah.
so, you know, so he
But I won by a
arrives.
lot.
You know, he arrives, and the area around him is like almost like a lush tropical paradise. And then he is like, wait a second, I just went about this without preparing. What the hell did I do? What if cruelty had grown into a common passion? What if in this interval humanity had developed into something inhuman, unsympathetic, and overwhelmingly powerful?
I mean, it had, but not in the way he expected.
Yeah.
I mean, and essentially, what is the thing with what Wells is, I suppose, trying to do there, because he obviously just is not presenting a utopian vision of the future at all. In fact, quite different. Yeah. And I think a lot of this has got to do with his own sort of take on sort of class antagonisms that, you know, of the sort that were advocated by Marx or whatever, and that they've in Wells's vision that they've been failed or been perverted.
Yeah.
And it's quite a pessimistic view, and it does actually reflect some of his own views. That, but he definitely had some sort of fears about what utopian socialism and communism were offering as an alternative. I think that is kind of what Wells is bringing out in this.
Well, at the begin, I'd have to disagree slightly.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the next couple chapters during his first few days in the future with the Eloi, you know, he's basically, you know, the time travelers thinking that this is essentially the end result of a communist paradise where everyone has become indolent and decadent, and thus started, you know, and has thus became weaker as a species. But, you know, like, for, you know, a few more quotes. As hold on, I accidentally scrolled down a bit too far. You know, I had always anticipated that the people of the year 802,000 odd would be incredibly in front of us in knowledge, art, everything. For a moment, I felt I had built the time machine in vain. And of the Eloi themselves, I never met people more indolent or easily fatigued. And here and there among the greenery were palace-like buildings, but the house and cottage, which formed such characteristic features of our own English landscape, had disappeared. Communism, I said to myself. And then, so he goes on for a good chapter of pontificating how the Eloi basically were a result of, you know, a communist utopia eradicating hardship and thus humanity itself sliding into decline. And he ends the chapter with a very telling line, and this is one reason why I disagree with your interpretation of the text. And that line is, very simple was my explanation and plausible enough, as most wrong theories are.
Yeah.
I think his observations of this world are incredibly... to have been written by a guy who's a socialist, his observations of the world are very troublesome.
Yeah.
To insinuate or outright state, as he did, that a easy life and easy living brought about by communism would result in essentially a androgynous race of lackadaisical, lazy people.
Lackadaisical, lazy children.
Lacking intellect or curiosity or true curiosity or focus is incredibly short-sighted.
Unfortunately, it is all this. I mean, it kind of comes across in a certain way, especially the way you phrase that there, that it comes across as one of like the oldest kind of like one of the oldest criticisms of communism, other than the human nature thing, which is the first thing people go to. But it's the whole, well, if everything's free, who's going to work kind of thing. And it doesn't take into, I mean, and I think Wells could perhaps be forgiven to some extent for this. However, I know Marx, I believe in his own time, before Wells, would have made this argument that human beings as a species need to work.
We will find something to focus on. And when we don't have to work for a living, we will focus on things like the art and progress and technology because we want to, not because we have to.
And my personal opinion is, if we get to a point, like if we actually get to a point where a universal basic payment is a requirement because there's a lot of machines doing a lot of the actual work, and then there was a thing brought up last night by Sam, where what you need to do is you need to tax the machines. So the business has to still pay the income tax that they would have had to, that would have been paid for having an employee, even if they're not paying wages, so that the government still makes money whilst they're using machines. So there's still a tax for running a machine. So you might say the business might save money, but the tax still goes to the government, and they can increase those taxes a little bit in that way, and that helps to pay for a basic payment for everyone. And if we end up in a society like that, I actually think we will grow as a society, because people have, like you said, people have time to pursue music and poetry and science.
Yeah, I mean, a society like that will advent a renaissance in the arts and in it's like we've seen it this year in the lockdown. How many people have you seen have been furloughed or aren't working for whatever reason, and the first thing they've done is pick up a hobby? Or pick up learn a new skill, or read more, or get into,
How many new
we are not built to be bored
in the last year?
Exactly. How many people are going out of their minds from boredom? We are not built to be bored. We will not,
I mean, even in like Russia between sort of 1917, 1918 until the sort of really the Civil War probably put a halt on a lot of this. You did see an explosion in arts and culture, and that as a result of the Russian Revolution, you did see you did see, and the thing about revolutions as a whole is that a lot of the time there is definitely a period in most revolutions where there is a thing of just loads and loads of ordinary people stepping onto the stage of history themselves and putting their own ideas in, and that's not just politically but artistically, creatively.
I mean, even if you
It's-
look at the Renaissance, big R, as in the Italian Renaissance,
Yeah.
most of the people in the Italian Renaissance were men of leisure.
Yeah.
And it's that great joke, isn't it, of, well, how did Shakespeare manage to write all these books, or how did, Titian create these beautiful masterpieces of art? Because he wasn't doing the dishes and working 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Well, while it's not as well, it's more pop cultural storytelling of a science fiction nature. If you want to look at what a futuristic socialist society would be, where everyone still has a job to do, but they're not being paid because we've changed the way we think about money and what people do. Star Trek. The Star Trek universe of the Federation is one where people aren't paid, but they still have jobs. They still have things to do. They still, you still have teachers. You still have starship captains. You still have people whose pursuit is their career to a certain extent.
Yeah, we see that, and we see that Kirk. Yes, he's a starship captain. He spends his time arguing with aliens and fucking the rest of them, but he also is very well read. He has his own personal library in his quarters. He's he's a thinker. He plays 3D chess.
Yeah.
He has the time to do those things because he's not relying on an income that he has to earn.
Yeah.
And likewise, if you just want to be an ensign on a starship because you don't want any responsibilities, that doesn't matter.
I mean, it does matter because eventually you'll put a red shirt on and go to the surface and die.
And die, yes. But
your life
the
will be
point
good
is,
before you
in
get
the
to that point.
context of their society, it doesn't matter because you can do what you want.
You only want to
be successful or usual as you want to be because you do what makes you happy, basically.
Yeah.
And there, and of course there is a bit of meta literary commentary as he's describing this vision of the future.
Yeah.
Where he throws some shade at utopian novels. Yes. But while such details are easily enough to obtain when the whole world is contained in one's imagination, they are altogether inaccessible to a real traveler amid such realities as I found here.
See, I mean,
shade of people hand waving the details.
Yeah,
I think it's almost sort of somewhat. It's a way. It's almost because. I mean, there was a great sort of thing. There was an awful lot of utopian socialist literature in the 19th century.
Yeah.
And I think, in a certain way, this is one of the first. But there's a certain pushback on the idea. I mean, one of the big. I mean, because there's a big misconception about Karl Marx that he wrote like utopians. Marx never wrote about future societies at all, really.
Yeah.
If you ever read Marx, his Marx was more about how do we get there. That would be what Marx thought about. But awful lot of people at the time who did write utopian works, whether they be fictional or sort of or just outlining a sort of, wouldn't it be great if society was like this or whatever, and rather than any thought out plan how to get there.
Yeah.
And of course, another, quote suggesting that, that the state of the Eloi is, basically just from pure communist, as the result of a decline of a utopian communistic society is, I must confess that my satisfaction with my first theories of an automatic civilization and a decadent humanity did not long endure.
See, this is the problem.
Yeah.
And he's picked up on the same problem the Romans picked up on. This is how far back this theory goes.
Yeah.
That mechanization will never be cheaper than cheap human labor.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. As long as there is cheap human labor, and there is an underclass that is forced to provide that labour in order to survive, there can never be a true socialist utopia.
Which is
Yeah.
what
But
we do
until
to
that,
the third world at the moment.
yeah, exactly. There is. If you see a utopia, you're not looking close enough, because there will be something rotten in the underbelly,
And
the
of
only way
course,
around that is full mechanization, a la iRobot. But then you've got to worry about robots becoming self-aware, which is what the whole movie's about.
See, I mean, even as a Marxist, or whatever, I do not have a utopian view of a socialist society. I do believe that a socialist society would be a hell of a lot better than what we have got.
Yeah.
But I think it could be very easy to fall into this, whole vision, you know, like this great
Of haves and
perfect
have-nots,
future.
yeah.
It will, you know, it'll never be perfect. It's where was I was going to go somewhere on this as well. God damn, I was going to go somewhere on this and I've lost my train of thought.
Yeah.
Choo-choo.
But, you know, because, yes, there is a dark underbelly to this future world. Because while we've been discussing the, you know, what, you know, how, you know, Wells might, you know, this presentation of a communist utopia is unrealistic. Well, it's not a communist utopia.
No.
Because this discussion, along with the time traveler, has neglected a very important detail. The Morlocks.
The Morlocks are the dirty underbelly that I just talked about.
Yes.
And they are, for all intents and purposes, and I'm going to say it, they are a slave class.
They were a slave class.
They were a slave class.
Yes.
And I think that there's an interesting discussion to be had, maybe not here, maybe not now, and quite possibly it's been done academically. I'd be surprised if it hasn't, on how Wells took possibly the concerns of his readership of what happens when a slave class begins to rebel, given his context, and use that to add an element of horror to the story. Because what he's done, he's created a class of people, a class of creatures, if you like, who want revenge, not justice. And he's assumed that's the difference. But the difference between, but let me finish. The difference between revenge and justice has always been what side of the fight you're on.
I have another possible theory on that, on where Wells was going, and I may be wrong. But I mean, looking at Wells' own politics, he was very much a reformist socialist, a social democrat.
Yeah.
In a way, now this is just a theory of mine that this is somewhat of a social democratic view of there's an awful lot of people from, say, the position like, say, Wells was in, not ruling, he wasn't ruling class, but sort of more middle class, I suppose. His origins, I know he was middle class, that the family fell on hard times, but they may have very, you know, big ideas about like wanting to have a socialist society, but absolutely rebel at the kind of what Marx was putting forward, of that the proletariat would be the instrument of change. It's the working classes that would step onto the field of history, and
there has always
push that change through. And there's always been a fear from a certain element of who may even be socialists themselves, but they do not trust the lower classes to step on to, you know, to do that. It terrifies them more. It terrifies them them more, that it's what's happened an awful lot in history, that when the pushes come to the crunches really come to it in revolutionary situations, and you can think of the Mensheviks in Russia or the Social Democrats in Germany at the same time. When it's come down to it, these sort of democratic socialists have sided with the ruling classes when it has been the actual workers themselves taking to the streets, and not only just taking to the streets, but actually starting to organize society themselves. They've suddenly become very counter-revolutionary.
Yeah.
And this is just a theory of mine. I think Wells is manifesting that idea a little bit. But
yeah, and again as well, it's that fear you talk about, those concerns of the ruling classes. Again, goes, and you know where I'm going with this, goes back to the ancient Romans.
Yeah.
They knew if the slaves in ancient Rome knew how many slaves there were, there would be no more slaves. If you have 10 slaves, you have 10 potential enemies. They knew this. And they had those concerns. And those concerns really do manifest themselves in any society where there is a divide between the higher and lower echelons on a class basis. Even in today's society, where we have people like Bezos and, Trump and people like that at the top, money-wise, do you really think they're not scared shitless of what would happen if the world's proles, if the working classes of the world said, fuck you and fuck your bank account?
Yeah.
Of course they are. That's why they're so interested in keeping us busy, talking or, feeding us mindless bullshit on the TV. That's what that is. It's I don't want to make the 1984 reference, but I'm gonna do, because that's the one everyone recognizes. But yeah, they give us our 2 minutes of hate. They feed us their propaganda, and we carry on letting them get away with all this shit.
Now, I'm gonna have to disagree with you slightly.
We don't always carry on letting them get away with this shit, as this week has proven.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about the purpose of the Morlocks in the story. I'm going to have to disagree with you slightly.
Okay, go
on. Yes, I will agree with you that they do add a very effective element of horror and danger into the work itself. However, I think what Wells is doing here is what he does to much greater effect 3 years later with the War of the Worlds, in where he's putting the shoe on the other foot.
Elaborate, please, because I may agree with you.
Okay, so the Eloi, it comes to light that the Eloi were basically mankind had split into two species. The Eloi were the products of the aristocracy and had developed into something that is arguably not sentient or not sapient.
I would say not. I would give it the approximate age of a 5-year-old, as he does.
Yeah.
Which says to me that it's sapient, but it is not intelligent.
Yeah. And the Morlocks, who living underground, became adapted to the dark and to working, and then at some point, and this is literally just a summarization of how it's presented in the work itself. At some point, the food supply from the surface gets cut off.
Yeah.
And in the world as presented, the Morlocks are actually the ones on top because they are using the Eloi as cattle. Wells, in similar to what he did with the War of the Worlds, where he's like, look at how imperialism sucks by putting the shoe on the other foot and, using the Martians. He's using the Morlocks as that, as basically a warning. It's like, here's what happens if class divide continues the route we're going down. What could happen. The shoes on the other foot, it's the working classes that have the power because the rich and powerful have become lazy and indolent.
I agree, but with a caveat. In order for the working classes to take that power, they must first be driven to inconsolable, inevitable desperation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the warning is not beware the working classes. The warning is don't drive them to desperation because you will lose.
I misspoke when I said the warning. When I implied the warning is beware the working classes. It's more beware social stratification.
Yeah, beware relying too much on your class structure and letting it take over. Class structure is a tool in order to maintain a society. However, if you begin to rely on it too heavily and it becomes the society rather than a tool of society, that's when you have an issue.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I'm just clarifying.
Yes.
Because I know what you're getting at and I'm trying to... Yeah. So he's essentially saying, look, you can have your riches and you can have your upper classes if you like, but the minute you drive your working classes underground into starvation, you start suffocating them. The point is, it's what imperialists everywhere know. You cannot keep a class of people under control unless you make sure they have something to lose. The minute people don't have something to lose, that's the minute they form a revolutionary force. And
which is where Trump was heading until he got...
Yeah, but this is what Wells is getting at. The Morlocks had no sunlight. Their air supply was cut off. Their food supply was cut off. You have to make sure people have, at the very least, the basics of survival. Because if they don't, they will stop caring whether they survive or not, and they'll begin fighting back. And they will survive by any means necessary. Because if you don't have the basics of survival, all moral and ethical questions of how to survive go out the window.
Yeah, this is why survivors in plane crashes will eat each other.
Yeah, they'll eat the corpses and stuff. And the thing is, it's because at the end of the day, when you're there, if you're in the middle of nowhere, there's that story of the fella who crash landed in the Amazon and ate his mate. When you're in the middle of nowhere, you're not looking at that corpse and thinking, that's my friend, I should be respectful. You're looking at that corpse and you're thinking,
that's a lot of meat.
That's a lot of meat and I'm hungry.
Yeah.
That's what's going on here. And when human beings are pushed to that, human beings are above all adaptable. That is our defining trait as a species.
And we're omnivores, so we will eat anything.
Yeah, we adapt and we survive. But we're only omnivores because we've adapted throughout history. So, we adapt and we survive. And we will adapt to the worst circumstances. It's again, people in ghettos in the 40s, they adapted. There's stories in the ghettos of the 40s of infanticide because they couldn't feed the kids and they had to survive themselves. It's the monkey in a hot room. It's that same instinct of put a monkey with its own baby in a hot room with the hot floor. As it's warm, it will hold the baby. But eventually it will realize it's going to die if it doesn't do something, and it will put the baby on the floor and stand on it.
I just want to come on.
That's survival instinct.
Yeah.
So I might be a minute or two behind here. So I wanted to come in on something Hissy was saying a little bit ago, and I just want to quote Lenin on something. And this is what the situations, and he put it into a sentence, situations where revolutionary situations develop. It's when the lower classes do not want to continue in the old way, and the ruling classes cannot continue in the old way. Which
I
is
opened the door and you took a nice stroll through it. Thank you.
And in a sense, I mean, basically, Lenin summed that up in a sentence.
Yeah. But that's entirely the point.
Also, as H.G. Wells put it, at first proceeding from the problems of our own age, it seemed as clear as daylight to me that the gradual widening of the present merely temporary and social difference between capitalist and laborer was the key to the whole position. And then later, man had been content to live in ease and delight upon the labors of his fellow man, and had taken necessity as his watchword and excuse. And in the fullness of time, necessity had come home to him.
Exactly. You cannot take necessities from people and expect them not to try and take them back.
Yeah.
And it's actually very pointed that I think you made the comment about people in plane crashes, Jen, because let's be honest, the situation he lands in as a time traveler is
pretty much a huge plane crash.
Yeah. And of course, he is trapped for several days in this, slowly developing into a nightmare of the vision of the future because his time machine had been stolen.
Stolen?
No, it had been.
I say that for a reason.
Oh, okay. Elaborate.
It's another literary trope.
Yeah, it's another literary trope.
Yeah.
Because tropes. But also, the thing is, when people are desperate, again, it's this desperation thing of they'll grasp onto anything new, anything different. It's grasping at straws. The Morlocks didn't know what this machine was.
No. And also, but taking it away from it meant he had to be part of there as the story, because otherwise the reader's going to go, well, he doesn't like this, why doesn't he just leave?
Yeah.
But all that shows is that all these creatures knew was that a person appeared with this thing, and that person was educated, well-fed, well-dressed.
Yeah.
All the things they weren't and all the things they wanted to be.
Yeah.
So it's a very simplistic logic, but the logic is, if he appeared with that and he is that, therefore this must make him that.
Yeah.
So a well-fed man appears with machine must make man well-fed.
Yeah.
Take machine, be well-fed. It's a very simple logic, but you can see how, if you don't, how you would come to that conclusion.
Though I will argue there is something that suggests that the Morlocks are a bit more cunning and intelligent than that, but we will get to that.
I mean, the Morlocks are, but just because you're... Listen, I like to think that we're sat here now in a group of people, we've got people in the chat, we're all intelligent, articulate, reasonably cunning human beings, to some extent or another, depending on which Hogwarts house you claim. But
I was wondering who was going to get the channel punching bag into the conversation today. I was trying to find a way to do it. You beat me to it.
Of course I did. Have you seen my background?
Yeah.
I'll be right back.
Do we have to go to Hogwarts?
No, I think we can go to Durmstrang.
Yeah, Durmstrang.
But Beauxbatons is also an option. I wouldn't want to go to the American school. I wouldn't want to go to any American school, but that's a different conversation entirely.
Entirely different conversation.
But the point I'm making is we are all educated. We are in a position, I like to think, where there's no one in this group or in the chat who is lacking the basic necessities for life. And we all still have that ape brain in the back of our head that says, you know, simple.
Me once.
That makes that makes simple things like that.
Lizard brain.
So yeah, the lizard brain. That's what I'm looking for, not the ape brain, the lizard brain. The lizard brain is still there. And in a situation where we were made that desperate, the lizard brain would still kick in.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what's happening with Morlocks. They might be more intelligent, as Ring said. They might have that cunningness. But the lizard brain is still dominant because they don't have the basic necessities for life. And that's what I was getting at with it. So, yeah. And Ring's disappeared, so now can't respond.
He's back. He's coming back.
Yeah, sorry. Had to take care of some necessities.
Yeah.
So, what was that I can't respond to?
So I was talking about how because you were talking about how the Morlocks are intelligent.
Yeah.
Yes, they are. And what I was basically saying is we're all intelligent, but we still have a lizard brain that would put that together the way the Morlocks did. And the way I said the Morlocks would. And when you don't have the basic necessities for life, the lizard brain is dominant.
Yeah.
Because it's survival.
But anyway,
it's like if you've got a cat and you don't feed it, it's only a week's worth of meals away from going wild.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
we are
twins are only a week's worth away from going wild.
Yeah. But the point is, we're no better. If you're in a really bad situation, you will do whatever is necessary.
And I like I said, I do have a counterpoint, but we will get to that.
Cool.
So the time traveler, upon realizing the reality of the Morlocks, decides that he needs to find a more secure refuge and ways to get him and Weena out of this predicament.
Can I also point out his relationship with Weena's really creepy?
Yeah, it is. Given
why do you think they made her older in the
No, even if you portray her as physically older, given the mental development of the Eloi, it's
I suppose.
He also has this weird there's a bit in, I think it's chapter 3 when he first sees the Eloi. There's a weird sort of pedophilic homoeroticism going on, where he looks at them and he looks at the male Eloi and passes a comment that he's basically passes a comment that amounts to him saying he's attracted to them.
And he talks
the
about
homoeroticism I can deal with, but the pedophilia not so much.
And of course he talks about how their air of fragility made them more beautiful.
That's the bit I'm getting at. Yeah. He's like he's just creepy.
See, no, that right there is a 19th century literary trope.
Yeah,
I know, but it's still creepy.
Because the tuberculosis makes you beautiful thing.
Yeah, TB makes you pretty.
Yeah, TB makes you pretty is the trope that's being used here.
Yeah. It's also one.
I wish you hadn't reminded me of that.
This is why I love Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah.
Because there's a great bit in it where it's inverted in that when Jane gets sick, Elizabeth does the long walk and she has bright eyes and mud on her petticoats, and that's what Darcy's attracted to.
Yeah.
It's inverted beautifully.
Well, I've got to say, I can't get my head around Jane Austen personally, but even though she's from my part of the world.
I can't get my head around the Brontes, and they're from just up the road, so don't worry about it.
Brontes.
But anyways,
I'm about 5 or 6 miles away from where she's buried.
Anyways, so the time traveler comes to the Green Porcelain Palace, which is, which is literally important to the story.
can I point something out?
Yeah.
A green palace, childlike people. It's the Wizard of Oz. It is the Wizard of Oz.
Wait.
I got such Munchkin vibes.
Hold on.
Yeah, but in which case, childlike people, they're not children then, they're just munchkins.
Yeah, but even still, I got such vibes from that. Didn't you think? Like, there's so many tropes that carry over into
Morlock's the
Wizard of
Wicked
Oz.
Witch or something.
Possibly the flying monkeys.
The flying monkeys. Okay.
No, I'm sorry, but you've got that backwards. The Wizard of Oz is the time machine.
Wizard of Oz is
Yeah, I'm aware the time machine came first. Or did it?
So what does that make, Dorothy?
If only we had a time machine to find out.
Yeah.
Dorothy's the time traveler.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Well,
So-
well,
Does that
obviously,
make Toto the narrator?
there's some
Or the
There's
narrator,
defi-
yeah.
I mean, obviously, you could say there's some crossover with themes there because of the political leanings of some of the people who wrote The Wizard of Oz,
Yeah.
so,
and the imagery as well. But
also about them being two fairly blatant allegories.
Yeah.
But this is how you do.
There's,
C.S. Lewis, if you're watching this from the past, this is how you do blatant allegory right.
what he said.
Yeah.
Wizard of Oz is okay.
It's much better than Narnia for an allegory.
Oh, that's true.
That's what I'm referring to.
That was your point, Narnia.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, Dante is a better allegory than Wizard of Oz, and Dante isn't an allegory; he's just straight up fan fiction.
I all I'll just say is that I did appreciate the time when Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead got to number 2 in the UK charts, and in reality got to number 1, but it was kind of rigged.
Yeah,
Jane, don't go in the closet. There's a dentist in there, and Aslan, I just can't tell you.
I kind of want Ding Dong the Witch is Dead to go to number 1 this week. Get on it, folks.
But and perhaps someday we will cover the Wizard of Oz, but probably not during Indigenous Peoples Month.
No, definitely not, because that would be incredibly problematic.
Well, we're only allowed one screw up amongst us, and Hissy and
we did that.
Stricken the Great Crossing during Native American History Month. We're like, oh fuck.
The thing is, I literally finished that stream, went on Twitter, and it rolled up my timeline. And I was
to be fair, you did spend the whole entire stream trashing Urdurzo for their representation.
Yes. So,
yeah, we did. To be in our defense, we did.
Yeah.
It wasn't like we were defending it or anything.
Yeah. But anyways, so the time traveler goes to the Green Palace, and it's a museum. And this is where he gets the tools and other, the tools that this is where he arms himself for his return. Which is, I'll say it, which is a good, a good illustration of the concept of knowledge being the real weapon.
Yeah.
It's like, you want weapons? We're in a room full of books. Arm yourselves.
And the idea that the Morlocks tried to preserve the books is...
Yeah.
I see that. That's your point for why they're intelligent, isn't it?
No, it's coming up. But to get to the point, we had to progress through the story, and the next point is the next point of importance in the story is him arming himself in this museum.
Yes, with matches, camphor, and a crowbar.
Yes.
Dude's MacGyver.
Yeah.
He's like, him picking up the camphor, matches, and crowbar has got such let's science the shit out of this vibe.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, he already knows. Oh, that I just realized that there's potentially a rather brilliant metaphor in here that I hadn't caught on earlier.
Say it before it pops out of your head. Go.
Because illumination
is a hell of a drug.
No, illumination is how he can drive off the Morlocks.
Yes, because they've been underground so long, and
so the metaphor here is illuminate the lower classes and bring them to a more equal standing, and the monstrosity of the Morlocks fades away.
And the Lord said, "Let there be light."
Yeah.
And it is again, and I think I know we may not totally see eye to eye on this. It almost, in a way, is the kind of thing of how do there is the element of fear of the working classes, but also so it was very two different ways of thinking about this in that time. That I mean, I think Antonio Gramsci sort of obviously talked about the sort of hard power and soft power and of how a state controls its people, and that sometimes soft power is more of a better exercise if you educate people and so on. Decent standard of living, they're less likely to rebel, which is quite amazing. You think just 30 or 40 years before Wells's times, I mean, you had the Conservative Party in Britain doing their nut about the idea of a Public Libraries Act, because they thought if the working class get too educated, they're gonna start getting ideas above their station that they can run society better than we can. I'm not kidding. They literally come out and said this shit.
It's to sort of build on that and give another example. It's the concept of in studies of international relations, 20th century international relations, there's the concept of the formal and informal empire, formal and informal imperialism, and cultural imperialism. And it all grew. The theory came up around spheres of influence, which is essentially a study of the USSR and the USA. And the idea that the USSR wanted a sphere of influence to protect itself from the USA, which is why they sort of moved into Poland and the Ukraine and all the rest of it. But the USA, rather than taking on land, which it didn't need because there's a giant ass ocean in the way, didn't need land protecting. What it needed was cultural sympathy from the cultures closer to Russia geographically, which is why Hollywood, propaganda, all that. And that was how America essentially it's the war for hearts and minds is what's going on there. It's hearts and minds.
It's no accident that in some of those states that from time to time in the Soviet Union and China on numerous occasions that from time to time there's been clampdowns on Western culture. It's no accident.
No accident that Pol Pot killed everyone who could read and walk.
There's also, it's not just cultural, but also economic. You can conquer territory economically as well. That I'd say there's a good little. I mean, the good little joke. I remember it was I don't know if you remember Rob Newman, the stand-up comedian, Hesse. I don't know if you remember him at all. He might have been big before your time, possibly.
Bit before my time, but the name rings a bell.
He did a good little routine that he said when he was actually listening to late night call-in shows when traveling through the United States, and he remembered like one woman phoning in saying, "I got all these goddamn Vietnamese people moving into my neighborhood. I don't like it. Goddamn Vietnamese living right next door to me. They're coming over here all the time. How would they feel if a whole bunch of Americans just suddenly decided to go into Vietnam?" So it's Rob Newman's only response was,
well done,
"Where
Jeff.
do we begin?"
Where do we start with that?
Yeah. But his whole analogy is that that he said that the US realized that territory they couldn't conquer militarily, they could conquer economically, and so and eventually led to Vietnamese people having to come over and work in branches of Dunkin' Donuts and be paid so low that they have to move in next door to ignorant white trash.
It's the same thing with it is a conspiracy theory, but it's one of those conspiracy theories that I can see why those who have an agenda or those who lack the understanding of how it works might fall for. And it's the conspiracy theory that as the Third Reich fell, Germany took on a policy of economic control. And through the EU and through the IMF, has begun to build the Fourth Reich. Bullshit. Which is you can see why people would follow that logic.
Which is something we touched on our previous stream, Hissy, about the German economic miracle and why they were successful. We actually briefly touched on that, but anyhow, I think we're getting off topic a little.
Yeah. Back on topic.
But
back on topic. I want a malachite table. Husband, make it happen. Because that image just stuck in my head as I was reading it.
But also, he realizes, as he's exploring the Jade Palace, that in the depths of it also lie the Morlocks, because it's been built into the side of a hill. And I mean, there could be, something said there about how the working, the working class is always there. Like, no matter how much you try to ignore them, the poor working class will always be there.
There is and this is the fall of. This is why socialism, as an ideal utopian socialism, can't work. There have to be workers. There has to be something there in the place of full mechanization, which we've already established would never work.
Yeah.
What does work, however, is a form of socialism by which everyone works a little bit in order to keep everything going, and everyone is valued equally for the contribution they make, which is not what this dystopia has. This dystopia has attempted to create an ideal on the backs of an underclass. What it should have done, in order to get a utopia, what you need is equality across the board.
Yeah.
Everyone, regardless of whether you're Mr. Big High-flying CEO or little lowly cleaner, everyone needs to get the same level of respect and the same level of income. Only then does socialism work. But equal to that, everyone has to do their fair share of the work. And that's what's failed in this. The Eloi are not doing their fair share of the work.
Yeah.
And that's where the problems arise.
or rather, the ancestors of the Eloi did do their fair share of the work. Because now, at this point, the Eloi are little more than domesticated cattle.
See, I have a problem with this concept of them being cattle because you're working on the basis that the Morlocks are the ones in control. But how can you say that a group that's being forced underground that struggles to survive are the ones in control when there's a utopia?
This is the thing. You're confusing the current situation with the situation that gave rise to the state of affairs.
I mean, in the situation that gave rise to, the thing is, the current situation is still that the Morlocks are not. They haven't achieved a level of living that is on par.
Arguably, we can't say that because we only see brief glimpses of what Morlock life is like, and very brief. Like, we don't really know anything about the Morlocks,
other than they eat people.
Yeah, other than the fact that they've been so physically adapted to the dark that they cannot stand the light, and the fact that they feed on the Eloi. Eat the rich.
I think though that the difference is they haven't domesticated the Eloi; they hunt the Eloi, and there is a difference.
Yeah,
the Eloi exist in the sort of blind, ignorant, childlike state as wild animals like deer. Famously, deer have got the intelligence of young children, and the rest of it.
Yeah,
they're more like deer than cattle.
I would say I will grant that.
That's why I think the Morlocks are more like a hunter society than they are a hunter-gatherer society than they are a urbanized society with a reliance on cattle and breeding and rural pursuits.
Yeah.
They're Robin Hood. They're not. What's the other version? I should have thought this analogy through before I started saying it. They don't go to the supermarket. They go out into the woods.
Yeah.
That's the difference. And that difference means that the Eloi are not domesticated and therefore are not cattle.
I'll say the Eloi aren't domesticated, but they are penned.
I would say they are. I mean, they're penned in the way creatures in safari parks are penned. They are penned so broadly that it's difficult to perceive that they are penned. Or, nature reserves them that in that way.
Yeah.
But then that makes the Morlocks more like poachers than hunters.
Yeah.
Which I think makes, to me, they have that. Maybe because it's people and it's cannibalism, and then again, it's cannibalism if they're not equals or if they're not.
Arguably, they're since they are different species. Technically, it's not cannibalism.
Technically, it's not cannibalism, but that definitely sounds like it came from the mouth of Hannibal Lecter.
Scientifically and biologically speaking, it's not cannibalism. But in fantasy sci-fi terms, depending on how sapient you consider the Eloi, it may be cannibalism.
Like the whole undercurrent, like I keep mentioning Hannibal because I've been binging it recently, but like the whole point of him is it's not cannibalism if they're equals. They're not equals. but he means it in a social manners kind of way.
Yeah.
They mean it. They're physically not equals. They've listen. Right. I am a human being. An ape is an ape. I'm not going to eat its meat.
Yeah.
We evolved from a broadly similar, it's too close.
Yeah.
That's what's going on with this book.
Yeah.
It's apes and humans is kind of what I'm getting. That's what we should do next week. We should do
Planet of the Apes. Possibly we'll discuss things later.
Yeah.
Yeah. You dirty ape.
But anyways, so he, armed with his camphor and his matches,
yeah,
he and Weena leave the Green Porcelain Palace, and it's getting on nightfall. And he has the brilliant idea of, I'm going to start a fire in an area that hasn't seen fire for who knows how long.
With camphor.
That's clever.
Yes.
Which I should point out, camphor is essentially I'm pretty sure it's used in, if not, it's definitely, I would view it along the lines of a proto version of napalm. This shit burns. And it doesn't stop burning.
So, it's got kerosene in
it. Yeah. So there's that. He just basically decides to start a napalm fire, is what's going on here. Because, our time traveler is nothing if not an intelligent, considerate human being who really thinks about the consequences of his actions.
So here is where we see the difference between intelligence and wisdom. The time traveler is intelligent.
He's not.
But not wise.
He is not wise.
He knows how to make the fire. He doesn't stop to think whether he should.
Yeah. And, gets a forest fire started and is, heading towards the White Sphinx to get his time machine back, and occasionally lighting matches to, drive off the Morlocks. But here's the thing. During one of these scuffles of darkness, the Morlocks take his camphor and his matches out of his pockets. And then, after Weena unfortunately dies in the forest fire, or fortunately, if you don't want to think about his relationship with Weena, he makes it back to the White Sphinx, and here's my counterpoint. When he arrives at the White Sphinx ready to pry it open with his crowbar and burst in to take his time machine, but the doors are open for him.
They knew he was coming.
They knew he was coming for the time machine, and they used it to lure him into a trap.
I mean, to be fair, that's, again, it's that hunter.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's still
It's a survival. Yeah, it's an intelligence of a sort. And I can see what you're getting at.
Yeah,
I mean, to be a slave labor, they still had to have intelligence. So
yeah, they disarm him and then lead him into a trap.
I agree with you what you're saying of they have an intelligence. Yeah. I think there is a difference between having a lizard brain, having an intelligence, and being capable of critical thought. Those are three very different things.
And
some of them are reliant on other things, but they are three very different things.
And of course, given the way, that this is a weakness in the structure of the novel, that being told as as an eyewitness account or whatever, as a first person limited account, since the time traveler didn't spend any significant amount of time with the Morlocks, we can't judge just how intelligent the Morlocks are.
No, all we can do is go on what we've heard. It's hearsay.
And he like as they're about to, before they start, before they make their move on him, whenever he encounters them, he hears them chattering amongst themselves first. And yes, you can easily argue that that's a horror element because it's very effective as one.
Shows an established language.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
And they are capable of abstract thought, like setting traps. Unlike the Eloy, who he says, the language is largely verbs and nouns.
Yes.
With very little by way of abstract language.
Yeah.
So, yes, I see what you're getting at. I also have an observation about the Morlocks that you've avoided so far. So I'm going to give you a moment to hover your mouse over your banner list and you can decide which one you want to use. We have pale creatures that live underground, feed on, not that one, Ring, feed on the flesh of other creatures, not that one, and are afraid of light and fire. Like, all they're missing is a cape and sharp canines. They are vampires.
So you're saying they're vampires?
They're a 19th century literary trope.
Yeah.
Well, though they don't.
Well, in which case they're more like whites, then, aren't they, than vampires?
Or ghouls, perhaps.
They're still a 19th century literary trope. They're a monster.
Yes, I'll grant you that.
Is that the drinking game, by the way?
I think so. Don't do it though. Your liver will not thank you.
Yeah. Especially when we're discussing works that are coming out of the 19th century.
Yeah. There's that. There's also, can I point out the Prometheus elements of this?
Yeah.
And the fire and
No, that's
no, that's not Prometheus. That's Daedalus.
I apologize for that.
Yeah.
The idea of fire being both the dangerous thing, but also the saving grace.
Yeah.
And one man bringing fire to a society that's, let's be honest, he is the Prometheus of that story.
Yeah.
He brings fire to this society.
And of course, this is also where we can get your allegory of the cave that you alluded to.
Yeah. Because it's, what exists, what doesn't, and
or to quote from another movie, I was born in darkness, molded by it. I didn't see the light until I was already a man, and then it was nothing but blinding.
You merely adopted the dark.
Yes, you merely adopted the darkness.
Yeah, I still think you should have just tried to do a Yorkshire accent as you did that, rather than aiming for an actual impression.
I don't know. I think my Tom Hardy Bane was fairly spot on.
That wasn't bad.
Not bad at all. To me, it sounded a bit more like Sean Connery, but
you forgot to put your hand in front of your mouth. That's what.
Yeah.
It was.
Don't know what you're talking about, Hishy.
But anyway,
not in the week that he died. Come on, show some respect there.
And that was last week.
That was
and
last
so,
week.
but of course, the time traveler knows something that they don't. That his machine is a time machine. And he manages to barely escape by launching himself blindingly into the far future.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is where we leave the narrative core of the novel because, and of course, this is where most adaptations fall off because, the real narrative core of.
Are you getting into the deleted scenes bit here?
Deleted scenes?
And it takes a turn for something more akin to existential horror.
Yeah, this definitely feels like that one episode of Doctor Who where they're on a ship in Utopia. It's definitely got that feel to it, hasn't it?
Where, he goes so far into the future that the sun has expanded and turned red.
And collapse. Yeah,
and he stops, and there's nothing on the beach except for he's on a beach.
How does that happen?
I reiterate, let's do Planet of the Apes next week.
Yeah. Arguably, with erosion patterns and such,
everything would be a beach.
Well, because because he starts his journey in his lab in London.
Yeah.
800 years in the future, it's become a Delta Valley.
8,000 years.
800,000 years.
Yeah.
It has become a Delta Valley. We're talking millions of years. It is the shore of a far distant sea.
Yeah, but not when the sun expands, it might be.
Yeah.
But the sun's only a red dwarf at this point. It's not collapsed yet.
Yeah.
It's not collapsed into
No. Well, red giant.
Red giant, not red dwarf.
Red giant.
Actually, I don't think it had quite expanded at this point.
No,
because,
it was just a lot hotter.
Damn it, Jen, I'm a historian, not an astronomer.
Because he does make another. So, anyways, he sees this giant crab, which a little bit of topical news. It turns out that crustaceans really like evolving into crabs.
No shit, Sherlock.
Are you aware of that study that recently came out, Jen?
No, it's biology.
Yeah, but apparently, things just keep turning into crabs.
Huh.
You should have saved that for the Stump Jen stream ring.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should have.
But anyways, but though I will say that the crabs as depicted in the time machine cannot be crabs.
Listen, if it's got a shell and legs and it walks sideways, it's a crab.
Yeah, okay, it cannot be a
crab. If it's got 2 legs and it's got no hair, it's a man. Now, don't show me a chicken.
It cannot be a crustacean. Because, one, at this point, the atmosphere has become rarefied because the time traveler is having difficulty breathing because of how rarefied the atmosphere has become. 2, these creatures are the size of a dinner table.
Big crabs.
Now,
big crabs.
Now, the way arthropods breathe, in such an atmosphere, an arthropod cannot get that size. So these creatures have to have lungs.
This is the point at which I sit down and shut up and pay attention to the guy who grew up on Attenborough.
Well, no, if you had if you have a heavy oxygen-rich environment, yes, you could, and a human would still have difficulty breathing.
Well, no, yeah. The thing is, the way it's depicted, the time traveler says he was reminded of hiking high mountains. So we're talking a rarefied atmosphere.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we're talking low oxygen.
And the only reason we got the giant insects of the Carboniferous is because the atmosphere had a much higher oxygen content. So in this far-flung future with a low oxygen content, these crab-like creatures have to have lungs and thus cannot actually be crabs.
What if crabs had evolved?
Yeah.
yeah.
Why couldn't a crustacean
It could be the
evolve
evolutionary
lungs?
descendants of a crab. Descendants, not defendants.
Yeah. But yeah, even the crustaceans that do live on land seem to tend to follow the same rules of, like, they only live in areas where bugs can also be big.
Let me find the Kindle thing and bring this up. Let me go straight into the first page, shall we? Yes, we're up on the screen. Brilliant. Now,
what's going on here?
Why have you got?
Yeah,
I don't know what happened there.
In the background there, Jeff.
Yeah, something happened there. I don't know what happened there.
Yeah,
but I have no clue what just happened a minute ago.
And of course, they start swarming all over the beach, so he jumps ahead again in his time machine to escape the crab rave. And yes, I literally just mentioned this part of the joke just to make a crab rave joke. Or mention this part of the story just to make a crab rave joke. So, he escapes the crab rave and then goes further into the future where he's not even sure where he's thinking that he's the only living thing on, in his location. And this is where he sees the sun as giant in the sky and views an eclipse of either the moon or one of the inner planets. He can't tell which. And we get this kind of, essentially the point of this section of the book is all things come to an end, even our species. He watches the eclipse and he notices a spherical shape with tentacles moving in the shallows. And he just kind of has this introspective moment on this far-flung future beach with possibly the last living thing on Earth. And then he returns to his and then he returns, to the dinner party. And we get another bit of brilliant, kind of meta commentary on the, from H.G. Wells, where the time traveler wraps up his story and then he turns to the party, he turns to the rest of the group and he says, "Take it as a lie or a prophecy. Consider I've been speculating upon the destinies of our race until I have hatched this fiction. Treat my assertion of its truth as a mere stroke of art to enhance its interest. And taking it as a story, what do you think of it?"
An unreliable narrator. Because 19th century literary tropes.
Yes.
I think the entire point of this book is to show the reader in a way how gullible we really are.
Yeah.
That and to talk about politics.
Yeah. talk about why we should eat the rich.
Yeah.
Yes, eat the rich.
Because they are crispy and good with ketchup.
Yeah.
Of course
But-
you should eat the rich. The rich are lean. Lean meat tastes good.
And of course, in the story, there is also the fact that he does have the flowers from the future because Weena put some in his pocket.
It's an interesting concept because obviously, also another person who's not in that list of guests is a botanist.
Yeah.
Someone who can independently verify that these flowers don't exist.
Yeah.
Um.
Well, to be fair, like when the time traveler called this dinner party, he didn't know that he would accidentally have flowers in his pocket from the future.
He didn't, but he didn't know that he was going to be. He didn't know a lot of things, but he still had the narrator there, and he still had the silent man there. Also, I want to talk about the silent man.
Yeah.
Because he got stuck in my head. He reacts very animalistically. Never speaks. I think there's a point where the time traveler sort of snaps his fingers at him and he jumps and freaks out.
Yeah.
And I'm going to call it a headcanon because I have no textual evidence for this. I think he's a Morlock.
Ooh.
He's
That has travelled back in time.
Yeah.
Interesting headcanon.
Because think about it. He displays all the same characteristics as the Morlocks. He's not going to
Is he
speak in a
afraid of
room
the
of
light,
people
though?
Well, he's not going to speak in a room of people who don't speak his language.
Yeah.
He has this animal tendency. He reacts to the light. He's not necessarily afraid of it, but there's a bit where they light a candle and he reacts.
Yeah.
He could be a Morlock.
Interesting.
Now I want to know if somebody else has had that idea.
Yeah.
If they have, it's probably on AO3 somewhere.
And and of course the time traveler begins doubting his own story, and he rushes down to his lab and sees that yes, the time machine is there, and it is a bit banged up, and it is also across the lab from where it started. The exact amount of distance the Morlocks had dragged it to take it into the white.
Can I just point out that's a big
Sphinx.
lab?
Yeah.
In London.
Yeah.
You've been to London, Ring. You've seen how close the houses are.
Yeah.
You don't think there's a lab that big in London?
Well, of course, we're talking late 19th century London.
Even still, townhouses didn't have
but
that big a footprint.
But don't forget, you got continental drift, and continents can expand over time, and so maybe when it got into the future, those two spots were further apart. But
Well,
use
also
science to try and explain a science fiction.
That's
also-
not science, that's geology.
Also, remember, when he appeared in the future, he appeared on a lawn right next to the White Sphinx. So we're talking about like maybe a distance of like 10 feet or so.
Fair.
Yeah. And
this light sensitivity, is it all right to go somewhere in my head canon that the Morlocks are gremlins?
Don't feed them after midnight.
but
And definitely don't get them wet.
By the way, I think I've just got Exploratory Minds project is just sub to you, I believe. I did say You are
Oh,
criminally
thank
underrated.
you,
Ring.
Exploratory Minds Project.
Actually, Exploratory Minds is worth a sub as well. It's worth a sub. Some of the stuff he does as well. So,
But anyways, he verifies that it wasn't, at least to him, it wasn't just a hallucination. And then, the meeting ends for the night, and the narrator returns to meet with the time traveler, and he finds the time traveler preparing for an expedition.
Why would you want to go back?
And so he's with a camera, and he's talking about how he will, actually go gather evidence and specimens. And then the narrator waits outside the the lab, and the time traveler's butler is like, "Oh, did he come out this way?" I was like, "No." And then he goes in and he watches the time machine disappear,
Never to return.
Yeah, and it closes with, it's been 3 years, and the time traveler hasn't returned.
Yeah, that's kind of how it ends.
Yeah.
Did you? Are you aware of the deleted part from this? In the there was some deleted part from, I think, the 11th chapter of this book.
No.
It recounts an incident after the time traveler's escape from the Morlocks. He finds himself in the distant future, covered in frost-covered moorland, simple grasses and stuff, but populated with furry, hopping herbivores, somewhat like kangaroos. And he stuns and kills one with a rock, but upon closer examination, it turns out they're probably descendants of humans, Eloi, and Morlocks, and a giant centipede-like creature approaches. And the traveler flees into the next day, finding that the creature is apparently eating the tiny humanoid. This was edited out by his editor, I suppose, when he was serializing this, kind of talked him out of editing this bit out.
Oh.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's interesting. It would make a very different story, wouldn't it?
Exploratory Minds, by the way, that's why we don't do things like Gremlins on Media Musings, because of contradictions like that. Yeah.
And of course, some some great last quotes. Like before I think, I'm pretty sure this is before the time traveler leaves. As I, for my own part, cannot think that these latter days of weak experiment, fragmentary theory, and mutual discord are indeed man's culminating time. And the book closes in like an interestingly uplifting way. And it's weird because I know you mentioned that you found bits of War of the Worlds like odd, strangely uplifting.
Oddly hopeful, yeah.
Yeah, and I found this like closing paragraph weirdly hopeful and uplifting, despite how horrifyingly dystopian the picture of the future is. So, the time traveler thought but cheerlessly of the advancement of mankind and saw in the growing pile of civilization only a foolish heaping that must inevitably fall back upon us and destroy its makers in the end. If that is so, it remains for us to live as though it were not so. But to me, the future is still black and blank. It is a vast ignorance lit at a few casual places by the memory of his story. And I have by me, for my comfort, 2 strange white flowers, shriveled now and brown and flat and brittle, to witness that even when mind and strength had gone, gratitude and a mutual tenderness still lived on in the heart of man.
Yeah.
And that's how the book closes.
I have to admit that line made me nearly cry.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are some great
Yeah.
quotes in this book, though, isn't there? That
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's one, that we should strive to welcome change and challenges, because they are what help us grow. Without them, we grow weak like the Eloi in comfort and security. We need to constantly be challenging ourselves in order to strengthen our character and increase our intelligence. And there's a lot of very good sentiments with quotes in this book.
Yeah.
But, like, despite how bleak and dystopian the bulk of the text is, the way those lines make it in on a very, like,
It's
inspirational and
denial,
uplifting,
Yeah.
Mm.
It's looking for the silver lining. It's comfort in denial of the inevitable.
Yeah.
And it's comfort in knowing that even as bad as things are going to get, I think it's taking that comfort in knowing what makes us human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as things get worse and worse, the constant is this childlike wonder, softness, a form of kindness. And he takes comfort from that, because that becomes the definition of what humanity is.
Yeah.
And it's quite sweet.
Yeah.
And if we think, 2020's been a hell of a year.
Yeah.
But if we like to think that, above all, human beings in 2020, for the most part, have come together, have worked on a lot of serious issues, and are actively trying to be better and trying to be kinder. And that, if we take that as the definition of what humanity is when it has nothing else, we're not a bad species all in all, are we? We're not too bad.
We could be
and
worse.
that's kind of what he's getting at. It could be worse. He's sort of saying, okay, as bad as things are going to get, we're still kind.
Yeah.
We're still decent. We still have an inherent kindness to us that not even the worst of the fall of civilization, the worst of circumstances beyond anything any of us can possibly imagine or have lived through will take from us.
Yeah.
That's a really good.
That's a nice thought.
And
I think that's a very good sentiment to. That's a good sentiment to almost end this on. Almost, I think it's it's better to end on a positive sort of.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, as I said, there's issues that to my own politics with this. Even though I'm a socialist myself, I have perhaps some differences with Wells's version of it, but I've voiced them. But he does make it does make some good points and gets the reader to ask questions. This book, about humanity and our nature and what we can achieve, and about future societies. It's and I said this is a bit of a break because there've been an awful lot of utopian socialist works and in the 19th century, and he produced a sort of even though he was a socialist himself, he produced a dystopian socialist work. I have my issues about where I think he was coming from at times. As I voiced, but it's a book that nonetheless raises really good and poignant questions.
Yeah.
And again, it's that thing with, and this is why I do class this as a form of sci-fi. It has that same hopeful ending, even though the hope is based entirely on on being in denial of the inevitable.
Yeah.
It's also based on a observation of how we as human beings respond to the inevitable.
Yeah.
And I'm not American, but I've heard it quoted quite a lot. It's the Mr. Rogers thing of look for the helpers, look for the good people in the worst times.
Yeah.
And it's really, really, it's that. It's the sense of as bad as things get, there will always be good people. There will always be a spark of goodness in the human race. And for a genre that is, lasers and jokes, and it can be very superficial and but that theory of the spark of human goodness seems to weave its way through the genre and be the bedrock of the genre. And it's beautiful.
Well, that's
rambling now,
shtick though, isn't it? He will paint a horror story, but he'll always leave you with hope.
Yeah.
It is his way. It's like, yeah, this can be, but
and as Never Again's putting in the comment, it's as different as we are as human beings. We all have that part of us, however small or quietly it speaks, that tells us we are all human beings, and we will. I think before 2020, I absolutely believe that the human race would come together in the face of ultimate catastrophe.
Yeah.
And Wells clearly believed that. Now, having observed differently, I would like to see where sci-fi takes it now.
Yeah.
Because it's going to take a lot more to get people to suspend their disbelief. But there is still that hopefulness there that's really important.
Yeah.
Never Again's gone for the channel punching bag.
Yep. Yes, Never Again has gone for the channel punching bag.
Yeah. I've got to take a drink every time she comes up in this.
Don't do that, you'll die.
We've been pretty quiet on her this week, to be fair.
Yeah.
We have.
Kind of, yeah.
Well,
well, she's not hopeful, so you've kind of, yeah.
Well, we're talking about human beings, okay? So we think she handed her a card a little while ago.
Yeah.
Well, she's more of a Morlock anyway.
Don't insult.
She's more of a Morlock.
Don't insult the fucking Morlocks like that.
But no, her epilogue is the complete opposite of this, because her entire story is young people with revolutionary ideas assimilating into an authoritarian regime.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's the outcome of her story. That's not a utopia.
Yeah.
That's not even hopeful.
But she's a good example of what I was talking about earlier, though, of certain people that are classic sort of social democrat stroke liberals that actually get terrified of like working class people actually doing shit for themselves. She's a classic example of what I was talking about.
Centrists and Blairites.
But no, if you look at the way that she wrote Dumbledore manipulating Harry and Hermione and Ron and the other kids to get everything to where he wanted it to be, so that they could win this war of his. That's bloody Hitler Youth.
No, do you know what it is? Think about it. He's Big Brother. He's Big Brother.
Oh, yeah, he is Big Brother.
He's Big Brother. He's the machines in the Matrix, or he's the architect of the Matrix. He's that character.
Well, he's not the hero.
Never Again. And for those who, and for those also who are, coming into the Medium Musings late, We have a running thing where a certain turfy former author who, a certain turfy a certain turfy author who is well known for a series of magical young adult books
Is the channel punching bag?
is the channel punching bag, and we do not mention her name.
She who must not be named.
Yes. And we've actually, I think this is the
Lady
only
Moldy Minge.
Like, I think this is like the first stream in a while where we've actually gotten through pretty much all of it without really bringing her up.
And then we get there, and then we get there right at the end.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that was all down to you, Jeff.
What the fuck? How was that my fault? Hold on. Let's go over the comments. How the fuck was that my fault?
So are we saying blame Jeff? Blame Jeff?
Blame Jeff.
Yeah.
I already said it in advance of this month that this was not going to be Blame Jeff month because I was not going to take the blame for whatever happened in the election beforehand. I mean, bear in mind, there was a chance that that fuckwit was going to get re-elected. So
don't you want to take the blame now? Because Biden...
I'm not that much of a fan of...
Biden
listen,
either.
fake progressive with a side of cop is still better than blatant fascist. Only a little bit, but it's still better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's my answer to that. It's still better. Because we're past it now, and I did say I wanted a day to celebrate, but then political analysis.
Yeah.
Baby steps, folks. Baby steps.
Yeah.
Gaga steps. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we've done it to death.
Well, Explorative Minds Project, we're going to be signing off in a few minutes anyway, I think. So
yeah.
So, shoot. So
the one thing I want to mention that no one mentioned is the sheer arrogance of Victorians.
Hold on.
The paternalistic white man's burden friggin' I must go everywhere and teach everyone who's different to me how to be civilized mentality.
The problem was they thought that they knew everything. They thought they knew everything that there was to need to know.
They ate mummies and radioactive material.
I know, but they thought they knew everything.
That's what's dangerous, when you think you know everything.
So I will say that there is a bit, H.G. Wells does take slight digs at it, or at least one slight dig at it, at that attitude. Once again, I, for my own part, cannot think that these latter days of weak experiment, fragmentary theory, and mutual discord are indeed man's culminating time.
Yeah. But then he goes off into the future and thinks he knows better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we all see how well that works for him because he never returned.
But did he not return for another reason entirely? Which is actually what they allude to in the movie.
Yeah.
He turned, I believe the time machine turned up in the Superman series in the 90s. So, that's probably what happened.
Or, maybe he was chasing Jack the Ripper and ended up in 1980s San Francisco.
Possibly.
I'm sorry, I had to reference. I had to reference that movie. I still prefer
the X-Men. I still prefer the X-Men cartoons version of that theory that Sabretooth was Jack the Ripper. But
like the culmination of the H.G. Wells built a, H.G. Wells is the time traveler trope is time after time.
Also, the fact that he can't control it very well. Do we think that eventually, like, he found an area in... What if every time traveler from every story is the same person? Bear with me. If H.G. Wells took the machine to somewhere far enough into the future that they had the technology to create, say, a housing for it and a cloaking device, and then he managed to work out how to get it to travel in space as well as time, and we know he's comfortable with the theory of dimensions.
No, see, here's the thing though. The next step in the development of the time machine, you're talking about way at the end, after the culmination. Obviously the next step is figuring out how to miniaturize the the bit that actually allows for time travel, and then putting it into a vehicle that can already move on its own, say like a DeLorean.
Yeah, that also is a theory.
Great,
but
Scott.
Have you noticed what they all have in common? None of them can drive it properly.
Yeah.
My theory is he accidentally left the brakes on.
Have you, now I don't know how. By the way, I don't know how many of you ever saw the one-off Blackadder thing called Blackadder Back and Forth. But that almost took sort of the idea of the time machine only going back into the past and history. But because it starts out with a dinner party, and Blackadder is it's a New Year's Eve dinner party, and Blackadder is deciding to what he thinks is going to play a practical joke on his friends. And he's got Baldric to build him some time machine based on a design by Leonardo da Vinci. And and amazingly, the thing works. He ends up going back in time, but they have a few problems because he goes to pull the lever off this thing for the sec to get them back to where they were, and finds out that it's like a Chupa Chups lollipop. He says, "So, Baldric, after the brief moment of genius, a stunning return to form." But it was almost, in a way, it was almost like the time machine in reverse, but he goes backwards in time and then accidentally ends up screwing up the past, then has to go back to resort it all out again, like because he accidentally kills Wellington at the Battle of Waterloo and stuff like that. And
that's right.
Yeah. And then he gets back. He's put it all right again, and then Stephen Fry said, "Well, it's just as well as somebody responsible with a device like this, a Blackadder. Just think what some ruthless, unscrupulous person could do with such a power." He says, just
I'll be right back.
I'll be right back. And suddenly he's king of England and abolished democracy, and
Yeah. The dangers of power in the wrong hands.
Yeah.
Well, so I think that's a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Let's move on to Shilling. Jen?
I've got a Stump Jen stream on Thursday. It'll be Thursday morning my time, so Wednesday evening US time, where myself, Matt, and Mero will be available to be stumped.
Ooh.
So that should be a bit of fun. So yeah. Aside from that, probably not much else because I'm so busy with everything else at the moment.
Follow me on Twitter. Read my fan fictions. Dead Dove Do Not Eat. Everything else I do involves either like one of these three fine folk. So I'll let them do the talking.
Scummer?
Okay, a couple of things. Obviously, Hissy and I do the Asterix streams. Next week we're on her channel. We're doing Asterix in Belgium, which is going to be Yeah,
That's a good one too.
I fully expect at least one 10-10 joke.
I thought that was Dutch, but anyway, yeah.
No,
I think
it was Belgian.
Belgian.
It's Belgian.
It's Belgian. Okay, but yeah, more than likely. But this is the so we're probably, I think we're gonna, it could be a sort of series 1 kind of thing, because we're getting to the end of this would be the last one that Rene Goscinny wrote. So we'll figure out where we're going from there, I think. More immediately, in just over 1 hour, I'm going to be among a number of guests on Sit Down with the Bunkers stream. They've hit 3,000 subs.
Oh.
They're doing a little party
Nice.
for that, and believe I'm one of the people going on. So,
Ooh, well, you deserve it. You've been on a few times now, Jeff.
I've been on a few times. Yeah, I've been on one time with family times. I've been on the Creepy Show about 3 or 4 times, and I've been on like I was on their 2,000 subs, and then I was on their 1,000 sub one, and now I'm on the 3,000.
Yeah.
Pissy came on me last time I was on, so
That's right. Yeah.
And as you know, as always, there's secular D&D on Saturday and Media Musings on Sunday. I thought I had a topic. There are a few other ideas being thrown around. So after this finishes, we will discuss it. Keep an eye on my Twitter. That's where I usually make channel announcements. Also, that's where I live tweet whatever the hell I'm reading and share wholesome animal pictures.
Yeah.
Also,
I
hashtag not sponsored by Project Gutenberg, but as before, the link to the Project Gutenberg ebook is in the description below, as are the links to my Teespring and Patreon, because maybe if people actually signed up to my Patreon, I can actually get some production value in this joint.
Yes, we really
you mean an
need to
actual
get him
green
like
screen?
a grey background or something, please.
And with that, be sure to like, share, subscribe, all the YouTube things. And there are other edited videos in the pipeline. I'll announce them when they're ready to be announced.
Watch this space, folks.
Yeah, watch this space. Well, more like watch my Twitter, because that's where I actually announce things. And with that, we'll move on to taglines.
Well, I don't
Take care.
do it.
Be good, and if you can't be good, be careful.
I don't have any, so at least you know. I need a tagline, really.
Well, I mean, isn't salute your tagline?
It kind of is, but I was going to go with may all your stains be large ones, but I don't know if that's going to be catch on.
May all your stains show up in ultraviolet light.
Like a Jackson Pollock painting.
Yeah. And and remember, indoctrination is a hell of a selfie stick, so don't choke on it.
Bye.